When Joe Rogan speaks, people listen. But this time, it wasn't a joke, a theory, or a casual observation. It was a moment of intensity, a moment that stopped the entire studio cold. During a conversation that seemed ordinary at first, Joe shifted his tone and leaned in, saying, "There's something unspoken about Charlie Kirk's widow, something people aren't seeing." And just like that, the internet lit up. He didn't speculate wildly. Instead, he pointed to the gaps, the missing pieces in Erica Kirk's public story, the unsettling silence around her role in Charlie's final months, and the inconsistencies in the narrative she has repeated for years. Joe suggested there were details behind Charlie's decline, behind Erica's decisions, behind the tensions in the Kirk family details, that no one has dared to address openly. And when Joe Rogan even hints at secrecy, people know there's more beneath the surface. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Comment sections filled with theories. Old footage of Erica was rewatched and analyzed. Listeners noticed how carefully she spoke, how she avoided certain subjects, and how she always managed to pivot conversations away from the most difficult questions. Joe's words weren't loud, but they were powerful. You can feel it. There's something people aren't saying. Now everyone wants to know what exactly is being left out of Erica's story. What truth lies in the silence she refuses to break? And why did Joe feel compelled to speak up now, at this moment, when her public presence has never been more fragile? The clip began like any other Joe Rogan segment, casual, curious, full of back-and-forth energy. But all of that shifted the moment Joe stopped mid-sentence, leaned back in his chair, and said the line that sent shockwaves across social media. "There's something unspoken about Charlie Kirk's widow." He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't move on quickly like he usually does when tossing out a thought. He let the words sit. Heavy, intentional. His guest froze. The room grew still. Even the producer behind the glass glanced up, because everyone knew Joe doesn't talk like that unless he's absolutely sure there's more beneath the surface. Joe didn't even have to say Erica Kirk's name. Everyone knew who he meant. And within minutes, the clip was spreading faster than any political commentary he had done in months. But what made it so explosive wasn't what Joe revealed, was what he refused to say outright. He hinted at gaps in the timeline, decisions that didn't make sense, a silence from Erica that felt too polished, too controlled, and too rehearsed. He pointed out how every time questions arose about Charlie's final months, Erica danced around specifics, repeating vague phrases about privacy, honoring his legacy, and respecting the family. Joe's tone made it clear he wasn't buying it. According to Joe, every public story has patterns. Every person dealing with grief speaks a certain way. But Erica's behavior didn't match the patterns he knew. It wasn't the guarded grief of someone protecting pain. It was the strategic silence of someone protecting information. Joe said it plainly. You can tell when someone is hiding hurt, and when they're hiding facts. Those are very different energies. The moment he said that, the internet erupted. People began digging up every interview Erica had ever done. They rewatched her statements line by line, searching for hesitation, inconsistencies, or anything that hinted at the unspoken truth Joe was referring to. Suddenly, old clips that once seemed innocuous now felt loaded with meaning. One clip in particular resurfaced us. Moment during a live stream where a viewer asked Erica how Charlie's parents were coping. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked downward. Just for a second before she said, "We're all navigating things in our own ways." At the time, no one noticed the hesitation. Now viewers replayed it obsessively, convinced it was a crack in her carefully constructed image. Joe didn't claim to know the full story. He made that clear. But what he emphasized was the energy, the tone, the body language, the way the truth seems to bend around certain topics. He said Erica carried herself like someone who had rehearsed lines, like someone who had created a narrative she needed to maintain. Then, Joe mentioned something that shook the entire conversation. I've talked to people close to the situation. Not directly involved, but close enough to know things that weren't reported. He didn't elaborate. He didn't say who those people were. But he didn't have to. The implication was powerful enough. Someone in the Kirk orbit had spoken. And whatever they said convinced Joe that the real story was far more complex than what the public had been told. He pointed out how Erica controlled the flow of information during Charlie's final months, how she managed the communication lines, handled the schedules, and decided who got to see him. That in itself wasn't suspicious. Many spouses take on those roles. But what caught Joe's attention was how isolated Charlie became toward the end. Friends who used to see him regularly suddenly stopped getting invitations. Family members felt shut out. Communications shifted from direct contact to filtered messages, Joe said. When someone creates a barrier around a public figure, that's not always about protection. Sometimes it's about control. And that single idea lit a fire under every rumor that had ever circulated about Erica's involvement in Charlie's private life. Joe then referenced something far more subtle but unsettling: the timeline. He noticed the inconsistencies between the public statements and the private actions. One example involved a charity event where Erica claimed Charlie was resting comfortably at home. But according to someone Joe spoke with, Charlie hadn't been resting. He had been trying to reach someone he hadn't spoken to in months, someone Erica allegedly blocked from visiting. Another example Joe pointed out was the speed with which Erica stepped into public-facing roles immediately. After Charlie's decline, instead of withdrawing, she became more visible. Instead of retreating, she expanded her platform. Joe questioned whether that visibility was genuine tribute or strategic positioning. His exact words were, "You can feel when somebody's grieving, and you can feel when someone's managing optics." What made this observation even heavier was Joe's acknowledgement that Charlie's parents had always seemed tense around Erica. He recalled an old interview clip where Charlie's parents spoke about their son's work but noticeably avoided mentioning Erica. Joe suggested that the avoidance wasn't accidental, it was intentional. According to him, families don't go silent for no reason. And that one sentence set off a chain reaction across the internet. Viewers combed through every public moment involving the Kirks, noting awkward pauses, strained smiles, and distant interactions that suddenly made sense through Joe's lens. People also began questioning Erica's rapid disappearance from the public eye after Joe's earlier revelations. She had canceled events, gone quiet online, and stopped responding to inquiries. Some said she was grieving in private. Others believed she was hiding. But Joe's tone suggested something different, something more calculated. He described it as a person stepping back before the questions get too loud. And that was the line that cemented the idea that this wasn't just about grief or privacy. It was about something deeper, something carefully managed, something someone didn't want exposed. By the time Joe finished speaking, the internet was ablaze with theories. Some believed the unspoken truth involved financial decisions. Others pointed to family conflicts. Still others suggested that information about Charlie's condition had been withheld from the people closest to him. The theories varied, but the underlying theme remained the same. Something about Erica's story didn't add up. Joe Rogan didn't accuse her of wrongdoing. He didn't make claims he couldn't back up. But he did something far more powerful. He called attention to the silence, the gaps, the things that weren't being addressed. He exposed the shape of the truth without filling in the details. And that's what made the world lean in. Because when someone refuses to speak, the silence itself becomes evidence. When Joe Rogan leaned back in his chair and said, "There's something unspoken here," the studio went still. His words weren't loud, but they carried the kind of weight that makes an audience pause. The statement came near the midpoint of his show, right after a discussion about leadership and legacy, when the topic turned almost inevitably to Erica Kirk, the widow of Charlie Kirk. The tone in Rogan's voice wasn't accusatory. It was observant, even philosophical. But in the echo chamber of the internet, that one line would soon become the headline that everyone ran with. Listeners instantly knew what he meant, even if he never spelled it out. There was a tension around Erica's story, an air of mystery that had lingered since Charlie's death. Rogan wasn't the first to sense it, but he was the first to articulate it out loud on a platform that millions trusted. "I don't think it's about guilt or blame," he continued. "I just think grief, power, and legacy. When they mix, there's always something people don't say. That's human nature." His co-host nodded quietly, and for a moment, the podcast studio felt like a confessional. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, Rogan's quote had gone viral. Headlines screamed, "Joe Rogan suggests hidden truth behind Erica Kirk's silence," and Rogan. There's more to this story. Social media erupted with theories. Some believed Rogan was hinting at family tension or unresolved business within Charlie's network. Others thought he was acknowledging Erica's strength, the emotional weight of holding everything together while the world kept speculating about her. The brilliance of Rogan's phrasing was that it left room for both interpretations. The next day, clips of that segment were everywhere. Fans slowed down the footage, analyzing Rogan's expression, his tone, the pauses between his words. They compared it to earlier episodes where he discussed public figures under pressure. "He wasn't being negative," one fan tweeted. "He was empathizing. He just said it in a way that made people think deeper." Another wrote, "Joe sees patterns. He's saying what everyone else feels but won't say out loud." Meanwhile, Erica Kirk's name was back in the spotlight. She hadn't done anything new, but Rogan's words had reignited public fascination with her. To some, she was a figure of quiet resilience. To others, she was an enigma, a woman carrying secrets the world couldn't quite decode. "He's right," one journalist wrote. "There is something unspoken here. Whether it's pain, strategy, or both, Erica's silence feels like the loudest statement in the room." Inside the studios and boardrooms where conversations like these ripple out into headlines, producers and pundits began debating how much of this was intentional. Did Rogan know that his comment would reignite the story? Or was he simply being honest, allowing curiosity to do what curiosity always does, spread? Those who had followed his career knew it didn't matter. Joe Rogan never says what he doesn't mean, but he also never over-explains what he does. That's why every vague phrase he utters turns into a cultural Rorschach test. Behind the scenes, sources close to Erica described her as calm but weary. "She's not surprised," one confidant said. "She knows every word he says becomes a headline. But she also knows she can't control that. So instead of reacting, she focuses on her mission. That mission, continuing her husband's legacy through the foundation and her own speaking engagements, had already defined her public identity. But Rogan's remark had shifted how the public viewed it. What was once seen as resilience now looked to some like guardedness. Public perception split right down the middle. On one side were those who saw Erica's restraint as admirable. "She doesn't owe anyone her story," one commentator said on a popular talk show. "She's doing what strong people do. She's surviving." On the other side were skeptics who believed that her silence wasn't strength but control. "Rogan's right," another analyst argued. "There's something unspoken because she's keeping it that way. The silence benefits her." Both arguments spread like wildfire, further cementing Erica as a figure of fascination rather than closure. For Rogan, this wasn't new territory. He had always been drawn to stories where power and humanity intersect, where people appear untouchable but reveal cracks, just enough to make them relatable. In Erica's story, he found that paradox. "It's not about exposing anyone," he said later in the episode. "It's about asking why certain stories never get told. Because when you look at any person in power, the real truth is usually in what they don't say." That line hit harder than any accusation could. The internet immediately seized on it. "The truth is in what they don't say" became a quote circulating across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube compilations. Creators made videos analyzing it in slow motion, overlaying clips of Erica at public events. her measured smile and calm posture playing over Rogan's voice. The result was cinematic, almost haunting. Meanwhile, conservative and mainstream outlets alike began publishing new think pieces. Some praised Rogan for his intuition, calling his remarks a moment of clarity in a world of noise. Others accused him of feeding a narrative that exploited grief. But what everyone agreed on was that his words had reignited the story, not through accusation, but through implication. Erica remained silent. Her social media activity continued as if nothing had happened. Photos from charity events, inspirational quotes, and promotional posts about leadership. Her followers noticed that she never acknowledged the storm around her, but that only made them more curious. Every caption, every public appearance, every pause during an interview became fodder for interpretation. People didn't just listen to Erica anymore. They studied her in private. Those close to her described her as focused. "She's not playing a game," one associate insisted. "She's just learned that responding feeds the fire. If she speaks, they twist it. If she stays silent, they speculate. So she does the only thing that makes sense. She keeps working." By the end of the week, Rogan's phrase, "there's something unspoken here," had transcended the context of Erica Kirk entirely. It became a metaphor for the times, a reflection of how every public story now feels incomplete, layered with secrets and half-truths. Commentators began using it to describe other scandals, other figures, other movements. The line became part of the cultural vocabulary, proof of how Rogan's instinct for language could turn an observation into a phenomenon. And through it all, Erica Kirk continued to rise quietly. The more people talked about what she might be hiding, the more they inadvertently promoted her work, her foundation, and her message. Whether by accident or design, Rogan's curiosity had amplified her reach. Her silence became her brand, and her brand became her shield. By the time the dust began to settle, one thing had become clear. Joe Rogan hadn't created the mystery surrounding Erica Kirk. He had simply given it a name. And in doing so, it made her one of the most intriguing figures in modern media. The impact of Joe Rogan's words, "there's something unspoken here," didn't fade. It evolved. Weeks had passed since the episode aired, but the conversation still echoed across podcasts, newsrooms, and social feeds. The phrase had outgrown the story of Erica Kirk. It had become a shorthand for the invisible weight behind every public figure. The gap between what the world sees and what it never will. Yet for Erica, the phrase carried a personal gravity. It followed her into interviews, onto stages, and through every post she made. In her quiet way, Erica handled it like she always did, with grace and stillness. She never acknowledged Rogan's comment directly, but her actions became her reply. At her next public event, a leadership forum in Dallas, she took the stage to a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, and reporters waited to see if she'd finally address the speculation. Instead, she delivered a speech that could have doubled as a response without ever mentioning Rogan's name. "We all have chapters that don't make it into our public stories," she said. "That doesn't make them shameful, it makes them sacred." The crowd erupted. The line went viral instantly. Supporters called it powerful. Critics called it evasive. But everyone agreed she had reclaimed the narrative again. Rogan's comment may have set the stage, but Erica had turned it into a conversation about privacy, humanity, and the right to hold parts of one's life away from the spotlight. The irony was striking. The more Rogan had spoken, the more the world talked about her. The more Erica stayed quiet, the more control she seemed to gain. It was an old paradox playing out in real time. Silence as power. Rogan's audience, accustomed to dissecting everything found, themselves admiring her restraint. She didn't deny, she didn't explain. One fan wrote on a podcast forum, "She just owned her space." That's rare. But Rogan himself didn't stay silent forever. In a later episode, after the buzz had begun to subside, he revisited the topic one last time. "People took that line way too literally," he said with a laugh. "When I said there's something unspoken, I wasn't talking about a secret or conspiracy. I meant emotion." You can see it in her face-loss drive. Control, it's all there. That's what I meant. It's human. His clarification didn't undo the speculation, but it reframed it. For weeks, media outlets had treated his phrase like a mystery waiting to be solved. Now, it sounded more like empathy. Rogan wasn't calling Erica out. He was recognizing what she represented, the weight of leadership under the gaze of millions. The correction softened the narrative. Suddenly, the story wasn't about what Erica was hiding, but about how she carried everything she'd been handed: loss, legacy, and expectation, with remarkable discipline. That change in tone rippled across headlines. Commentators praised Rogan for his honesty and credited Erica for her grace. What had once been an implied tension between them now looked like an unspoken respect. Two strong personalities, one journalist wrote, seeing each other from opposite ends of the same storm. Erica, for her part, maintained her rhythm. Her organization continued to grow. She launched new programs under her late husband's foundation, expanding its reach to more campuses and communities. Every time the media tried to pull her back into drama, she countered it with action. Her story became less about speculation and more about substance. And still the phrase lingered, a reminder that some legacies are shaped not by noise, but by nuance. In one of her final public addresses that year, Erica spoke about the nature of truth. People talk about transparency as if it's the same thing as honesty, she said. But sometimes honesty lives in what you choose not to say. Silence isn't a lie, it's wisdom. Her voice was calm, but her message carried conviction. The audience rose to their feet, and the speech was shared millions of times online. It was, once again, the perfect closing statement. Not a denial, not an explanation, but an elevation of the entire conversation. Even Rogan acknowledged it later, calling her speech powerful and classy. For someone who built his career on questioning everything, his respect for Erica's ability to stay grounded said a lot. Most people can't handle that kind of pressure, he told his audience. She turned all that speculation into a lesson. You've got to respect that. The arc of their indirect exchange, from curiosity to speculation to understanding, revealed something bigger about both of them. Rogan represented the world's endless hunger for answers, while Erica represented the quiet strength of withholding them. Together, they showed how two opposite forms of influence could coexist, one through expression, the other through restraint. By the end of the saga, the phrase "there's something unspoken here" had transcended its origin entirely. It became a commentary on modern fame, on how the public consumes emotion like entertainment, and on how dignity can still survive in a culture that rewards exposure. Erica Kirk hadn't just endured another viral wave, she had redefined how to navigate it. She became, as one columnist put it, a masterclass in emotional intelligence. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was her armor. Every time someone tried to fill in the blanks of her story, they ended up amplifying her message instead. In a world addicted to oversharing, she had done the impossible. She stayed in control by staying unreadable. Rogan's audience moved on to new topics, new controversies, but the phrase stayed in circulation. It appeared on motivational posters, captions, and think pieces. It was quoted by journalists, influencers, and even corporate leaders discussing communication strategy. What started as a throwaway observation during a podcast had evolved into a cultural truth, one born from a widow's poise and a podcaster's instinct. In the end, there was no dramatic conclusion, no revelation of hidden secrets, because the mystery had never been the point. What Rogan had sensed, what the world had projected, and what Erica had ultimately embodied was the same universal truth: that strength isn't always about being understood. Sometimes, it's about staying steady while everyone else tries to define you. As the curtain closed on the story that had captivated millions, both Joe Rogan and Erica Kirk stood exactly where they began, unbroken, unapologetic, and completely themselves. But something had changed in the way people saw them. Rogan's curiosity had reminded listeners that asking questions is not the same as casting judgment. Erica's restraint had reminded viewers that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply endured. And somewhere in the space between Rogan's words and Erica's silence, The world found a reflection of its own, the endless tug-of-war between truth and perception, voice and composure. Noise and grace. Joe Rogan's simple line, "There's something unspoken here," lit up the entire conversation. But what happened afterward revealed something far more powerful than speculation. It showed the world what true composure looks like. As Rogan questioned, the internet spun theories, and media outlets rushed to interpret every word. Erica Kirk never once lost her center. She didn't fire back. She didn't chase explanations. She didn't bend to pressure. Instead, she chose silence, not out of fear, but out of strategy, wisdom, strength, and that's why her story struck such a nerve. In a time when everyone feels forced to respond instantly, Erica proved that restraint is still the strongest move in the game. She turned chaos into clarity by refusing to participate in it. She shifted the narrative simply by holding her ground. And in the end, even Rogan himself acknowledged the discipline behind her silence. So, what should you take from all of this? That you don't have to explain yourself to be understood. You don't have to reveal everything to be real. And you don't have to match someone else's volume to make your presence felt. Erica's journey shows that confidence isn't loud, it's consistent. Power isn't proven, it's lived. And sometimes the most influential thing you can say is nothing at all. If this story inspired you, challenged you, or made you see public pressure in a new way, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Discuss it, and let others feel the impact too. Your voice matters, and your silence can speak just as boldly.